Hello, everyone. I have emerged from my Diablo 4 addiction. I wouldn't say unscathed, but I'm here. It's time to talk about some other games. So as covered the last video on Throne and Liberty, we talked about how they held their closed beta test in South Korea last month, and the first impressions were mostly negative, with the majority of the complaints really centered around a rather poorly implemented combat system, a poor version of tab targeting. And tab targeting in and of itself is not the problem. Many games have done it very well. World of Warcraft, ArcAge, and Star Wars: The Old Republic, just to name a few. Like, you can make tab target combat that's engaging and satisfying to play. However, Throne and Liberty looks to have a very static and unengaging and, most importantly, unfun version of the system that even the most ardent defenders of Throne and Liberty have seemed to admit it's not a very good combat system. They like Throne and Liberty for other reasons, which, fair enough. Oh, and as a quick aside, I have been thinking and wondering lately if the current version of combat is just a holdover from when the game just a handful of years ago was a top-down ARPG. That's right. In case you forgot or you hadn't heard, throughout most of the game's development over these past 12 to 13 years, Throne and Liberty was way more akin to Lost Ark than it was what we see here today. The game got major changes, overhauls, restarts, but with how static and rooted the combat system is at the moment, it does seriously make me wonder if it's just a holdover from how the combat worked when it was a top-down ARPG, and they've migrated that over to this third-person version. Of course, we have no idea. That is just speculation. They may very well have started fresh, completely from scratch, with nothing carried over from the prior version of the game. That, though, we will likely never know for sure. But complaints about combat weren't everything. There were some other early critiques that cropped up around the game, including the use of auto-hunting, which does appear to pretty much be a requirement with just how grindy the game is. You will likely need to have your character auto-hunting 24/7 whenever you are not playing yourself in order to keep up with everyone else on your server. The game's cash shop looks to be about as bad as you expect for a free-to-play Korean MMO. Even in the beta, there were some very obviously pay-for advantage systems, even pay-to-win. It is free-to-play, it's a Korean MMO, so it was pretty much expected, but nevertheless not ideal. We don't love it, right? And then there were a plethora of other mobile-like elements and features in the game that frankly have no place in a PC and console-centric MMO. So yes, reception to the game was poor. So poor, in fact, that it appears to have affected NCSoft financially. At the exact time that the beta was taking place and these negative impressions started rolling out, the company's stock took a major hit, the largest dip seen over the past year, to the point that it is currently sitting at its lowest point over the past 5 years. Correlation does not equal causation. There may very well be other larger factors at play. I do not know enough to say either way, but yes, the beta happened, reception was poor, and the stock price plummeted. That said, we of course have to leave room for the fact that there may very well be other things at play between the markets, the company itself, and how that impacted investor confidence. But it's not looking good all around for Throne and Liberty and for NCSoft. But I am not here to rehash all of the early critiques for Throne and Liberty or to talk about NCSoft's financials. Instead, I want to talk about some of the various updates that we've gotten in the week since, with some potentially promising interviews that Amazon had talking about possible changes to the game. More so, though, can I just say to start how just overall disappointed I am? Because if you put aside all of the issues that all of the playtesters, CBT, all of those critiques aside, and you just pretend that the bad parts of the game aren't bad parts of the game, there's some really sick stuff about Throne and Liberty, like some really, really cool looking things. We've talked about like the basics of it, but now that we've got to see it in action, there are things that are really impressive. For one, visually, the game looks great. The fidelity, the clarity, the effects, it's all really gorgeous looking stuff. Like, this is a good looking MMO. And by all accounts, besides network issues with people in the West trying to connect and play the Korean test, it appears to run locally very well on a lot of people's systems. They've got this massive open world that is 100% seamless, 0 loading screens. You know the general shtick, right? But it's a really good looking and super, what appears to be a very immersive play space. Like, watching videos of people just running around the world doing exploration, that alone is enough to make me want to at least try the game and put up with this combat system. They've got these world events that take place regularly, but this isn't just your typical MMO world event where it pops up, there'll be a bunch of other players that show up and like you kill X mobs or do these objectives, fight a boss, escort an NPC. No, these are competitive world events where players and guilds compete to do whatever the objective is. So sometimes these can even be PvP flagged, so you're not only competing to do the best at the objective, but you're also fighting other players at the same time, and the higher you place, the better your rewards are. So there could be a world quest where it's like you gotta collect claws off of tigers or something, right? So everyone's going there doing claw fighting, but then if it's PvP enabled, you could kill players and take the claws that they've gathered. Like, it all sounds really cool, and in general, if you like PvP, this game is going to have a big focus on that. But there's also a lot of PvE, like this tower rush where you take on various bosses with ever-increasing difficulty, trying to climb as high as you can. They've got these huge multi-layered open world dungeons, and this is one of the things that I think is the absolute coolest. So not instance dungeons, and massive. You're going to see other people running around. They can consist of multiple levels and layers that go deep down, like these, with this one that we've seen that appear to be these ancient ruins that wind and go further and further deeper into the earth. And there can also be PvP here. There's open PvP in much of the world as well, where various regions will periodically turn to contested, and players and guilds will fight over things like world bosses. They look to have a fairly in-depth guild system, a pretty cool weapon and skill system with interesting interactions, where weapons basically function as classes, and it looks like they have a rather in-depth crafting system as well. Beyond like a lot of these like kind of bullet point back of the box features, there's some cool tiny things that are really cool for me. Like, for example, we talked about how weather affects stuff, right? But actually seeing it play out is super cool. Like, I saw this clip here where there was a rainstorm that happens and you can actually see it filling up a body of water. Now, it's like a rising and unrealistic and unreasonable level, but I don't really care about that. Just the fact that they've got this functionality where you will have a body of water, a rainstorm happens, and then that body of water raises, and that changes things. Like, this small example is just a pond becoming a deeper pond, but there's a lot of cool interactions that they can do with this in other parts of the world. We also know and have seen how this works with day-night cycles. Like, there will be specific dungeons that say the door to the dungeon won't open unless it's nighttime, and the moon out is like activating these runes, which opens the door, which lets people go in the dungeon. You can't go there during the daytime. Nighttime, you can go there. Really cool. Or out in the desert, they'll have these dust devils that will randomly appear, and if you walk into one of them, it's going to shoot you up in the air. Lots of really cool grand scale, but also small features and systems, and just some really neat stuff. And as I continued watching gameplay videos for Throne and Liberty, I was getting progressively more and more disappointed, because there is so much that's really cool about this game that it's going to be a real bummer and very unfortunate if those good parts are dragged down by the very bad parts. And combat is one thing you don't want to do poorly, because that's what most people are going to spend most of their time doing, I guess, unless you have an auto combat game in which you can just ignore that. But I don't know, it seems like unfortunately the bad is going to outweigh the good, but it is such a bummer because the good sounds really good. Now, is there any hope? Well, possibly, and that's where some of these updates come in. So first of all, the folks over at MMORPG.com sat down with NC and Amazon during Summer Games Fest to talk about the reception to the game, things that are changing, plans for the future, and a few other things. So they touched on the game's lengthy development, mentioning that it has been in the works for 6 years. We know it's been over 10 because they've changed iterations, but I suppose what they're saying here is the current iteration of the game has been in development for 6 years, of which they said one of the primary reasons is because we wanted to make an ample amount of content before hitting the market, further saying that they wanted to avoid the typical issue with new MMOs where players get in, grind through the content in a relatively short amount of time, and then ditch the game entirely after just a month or two. So they said that is why we prepared content, enough content, diverse content, and then we will hit the market, and the developers feel that it's almost ready. And I'm glad on the content front that they feel like they're going to have enough variety, enough breadth, and enough amount of things to do to keep people engaged, but that is only going to matter if people enjoy playing your game in the first place. And as we discussed, if the combat remains at the point that it is, I feel like at least in the Western audience, it is very unlikely to acquire like a critical mass of players. A lot of people whose opinions I trust, and I follow their coverage of various games and MMOs in the past, the ones who have got to play this have had predominantly negative things to say about one of the most important parts of the game, and that is the gameplay. And it's not just the combat as well, also movement has has often been referred to as clunky. Watching the gameplay closely, I think a lot of that might actually be down to how they handle like player turning. When you're moving your character around within the world, the fact that there's a relatively slow turning process animation for that character, that can actually result in something that feels sluggish or bad when those character interactions and animations aren't happening snappy enough. That may very well be what's happening here, but a lot of this stuff, I am of course reserving final judgment until we get to play the game, which might not be that far from now, but I'll touch on that in a moment. So next, the article goes on to mention that recent Korean closed beta test, the fact that it had a poor reception, and the fact that while many Korean MMOs will get changes when they come to the West, with some features either downplayed or removed entirely, it looks like for Throne and Liberty, that will not be the case, and they're looking to have global parity across all versions of the game. So the Korean version of the game will be just like the version of the game in the rest of the world. So you know how with Korean MMOs, it's often that it's released to the origin region for maybe 2 years or a year, and then it is published in the West, and in the West, maybe westernization changes occur to the game. We've been trying to minimize that as much as possible, so it's been working with NCSoft to create a global version of Throne and Liberty rather than siloed versions for different regions. That means coming out of the Korean CBT, where players provided feedback, we are iterating against that. The NC team is addressing that player feedback directly. Now, what portion of that feedback are they addressing? Well, they did mention that the two major pieces the team is working to improve are the combat and the progression. However, that is where it stops. The article does not go on to clarify. There are no additional quotes stating exactly what sort of changes they intend to make. They don't talk about if they're going to try to make the combat feel more fluid. They don't talk about if they're going to address how movement feels. They don't discuss anything about auto hunting, which for the record, can I just say, if a game's going to have auto hunting, that's fine. I don't think it's the end of the world, other than it's sort of putting the pressure and changing the baseline of the game. Like, some people will argue, well, auto hunting is good for the people who aren't huge nerds like you and play 10 to 12 hours a day. All right, I understand that, but that's not how it actually ends up working, because with the presence of auto hunting, that just makes it so that the new baseline is people running the game 24/7. I know they've got an offline mode if you buy the special version of the season pass, but the presence of auto hunting makes it so that the economy, that the pace of progression and everything becomes accounting for the auto hunting being in the game. So if you aren't running auto hunting 24/7, auto hunting actually does more of a disservice to you if you don't have that sort of playtime, if that makes any, like, I don't prefer it, but it's not the end of the world. The most important thing is that when you are playing the game, it's enjoyable. And again, as said time and time again, it doesn't seem like the act of playing this game is terribly enjoyable compared to any other iteration of Tab Target that we've seen in successful MMOs in the past 10 to 15 years. And I think that is the major issue. And while we got no clarification here, we do know that they are looking and they've heard the complaints about combat and progression. The complaints about progression, I assume, are referring to the fact that the game seems very grindy, accounting for that auto hunting. And that's another thing with the presence of auto hunting. They have seemed to really inflate the time it takes to progress, the time it takes to level and upgrade things like your skills, because they're assuming that you're just going to have auto hunting going 24/7. That's how it's working. So now the remainder and really the bulk of this article was actually discussing the game's weapon system. They were talking about how weapons basically function as classes with their own individual skills, which sounds pretty similar to what we see in, say, Elder Scrolls Online with their weapon skill trees. In Albion, really, where everything is dictated by the weapon and armor you put on, there are no classes, and sort of similar to Guild Wars 2, how the different weapons have their different skills. I actually kind of like that system. I've enjoyed it in each one of those games that I just mentioned, so that's pretty interesting, but that's not what I was looking for from this article, nevertheless. So beyond the article, we did also see the launch of an official Steam page and a brand new website for the Western version of the game. Now, beyond providing a basic overview with some details about what Throne and Liberty is, real boilerplate stuff, they also did give us an FAQ, which gave us a few glints of information here. So what kind of game is Throne and Liberty? Well, they say it's a free-to-play MMO, which we did know, and it's in the vast world of Solaceum something. In terms of platforms, we know it will be coming to PC via Steam. It's also coming to PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and S. Asked if you need an Amazon account to play the game, the answer is no, not to play the launch version of the game, although you will need an Amazon account to sign up for the upcoming technical test. That's right, that is happening here. 1 second though. How about controller on PC? Well, it looks like yes, Throne and Liberty will have support for controllers on PC. I actually really like that. Not that it's the way that I intend to play, but I think that's cool to have that support. It's nice to have that option. Servers, how are they going to handle that? Well, looks like it's going to be multiple regions with things like North America East, West, Central Europe, and Asia, and then there will be servers for those regions. So if you're going to play with friends, that was one of the other questions. They said that you can play with friends. Cat, are you kidding? As long as you have selected the same world to play on, regardless of your platform choice. So it is going to be cross-platform. You need to be in the same region and be playing on the same shard or the same server in order to play with your friends. I guess I'll be curious if they do allow any server transfers or server hopping, how easy or difficult they're going to make that. Who knows? We'll have to see. And here's one that I wasn't expecting. The game is going to have in-game voice chat. I wonder if it's going to be like local VoIP or most likely probably just like party, raid, and guild in-game voice. That's what I'm assuming it'll be. So, technical test. Here's the thing. Registration is currently open for an upcoming technical test for that globalized version of the game. Now, this is something that you can sign up for on that newly launched website. And unlike the Korean CBT last month, this is for everyone. It's for the global audience. And also, it's going to be on all the platforms. So PC, PlayStation, and Xbox consoles. And I am going to be jumping in. I absolutely want to and intend to spend some hands-on time with this game. I want to play it myself, although I do wholeheartedly trust the opinions of all of the content creators that I've seen, ones that I followed over time and gotten their opinions over the years. And that's a thing to keep in mind. You play the game for yourself, you form your own impression, but following people and being able to judge their takes on things over time does give me a good idea of what I am likely to experience with those games. And from the people and from the input that I've seen from sources that I just personally trust, it's not looking good, and it seems like the bad will outweigh the good. But that is such a bummer, and it is so disappointing to me because there's some really, really cool stuff in here. The things that I mentioned, but even stuff we haven't talked about or shown you yet. Either way, I am looking forward to the technical test whenever it takes place. People are guessing right now, saying maybe sometime this summer, sometime in the next couple of months. There is no window. It's all just speculation at this point. We'll see. But I am hoping sooner rather than later, or maybe I'm not hoping sooner rather than later, and I'm hoping they fix the combat before they do the technical test. That is actually, yeah, I retract the statement. Take your time. Fix the combat, make it more palatable for a global audience, and just for more people in general, forget regional things, just improve the combat, then release the technical test. And delay the game if you have to. I don't care. It's been 13 years, right? What's another year? Honestly. But there you go. That is an update for Throne and Liberty. I am always hoping for the best. Things aren't looking good for this one, but hey, we'll see what happens. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the vid. I'll see you next time. Take it easy.